I'm talking to you about the learnings I've taken from my OD practitioner's course, and this is my OD journey. And it really starts with me and a picture of myself at the centre of what I've learned. And the reason that's there is because actually it is all about me, because to be a successful OD practitioner you need to understand yourself and understand why you react in certain ways, and that's what I've really been focusing on throughout the last 12 months. And this kind of ties into also my running. And so in January 2012 I started running, pretty much at the same time we started the ODP course. And what I've recognised is my running is also a reflective practice, just like organisational development is. And what I don't know though is my running similar to my practice, or is my practice similar to my running? And the reason I say that is because at the centre of both of those is, for me, practicing being mindful. So being mindful, being present, and just being. So when you're out on the road running, you can't afford to think about anything other than that moment and the moment your foot hits the road. Because if you were to think about how much further you had to go, you wouldn't enjoy the moment that you were in. And so that's very much what I've been focusing on, around just noticing what I notice. So noticing what I notice in my running, so listening to my body and understanding what that's telling me. But at the same time in my OD practice, doing exactly the same thing. So noticing what I notice in the organisation and what that therefore is telling me. And because I've been working on myself as instrument, I'm able to pick up whether it's a reaction in me or is it a reaction in me because of the business and the environment in which I'm working on. I'm having to take one step at a time. Again, in running, it's all about 1 mile at a time, one step at a time. And the same in my practice, just recognising actually, well, what is it I'm trying to achieve, and is it my intention or the intention of the organisation? And I think what's also kept me going throughout my whole OD journey has been celebrating what's right in the world. So there's a little trick that I have to use when I'm out running to keep me going, is just noticing what's going on in the world and actually celebrating what's right with that. And there are times where you see things and you don't see things. So I have run through Windsor Great Park on several occasions, and yesterday for the first time I saw a building that I hadn't seen before. And I think that's also an important point to bring through into my practice in the organisation, and this role of being part of the organisation, or are you on the edge of the organisation? And sometimes, even though you try to be mindful and be present and look at things through a different lens, you still don't sometimes see what you could be seeing if you were celebrating what was right in the world. So I suppose that's what's been core to me as I've been going through the last 12 months, was recognising myself as instrument and recognising what that meant for me. At the same time, something that came through quite strongly in our first module was around renewal time, and I recognised that I hadn't been focusing on myself or what I needed in order to ensure that I could deliver the best that I could deliver in my work practice. And so renewal time has very much focused heavily throughout my journey, and running's part of that. Running has been my ability to recharge and take energy from my surroundings and bring it back into my practice. And what I've also recognised is once you've tuned in to what your body's telling you and what you notice and your reactions, it's really difficult to tune out, to the point where you're continually having to ask, or I'm continually having to ask, is, am I reacting to something in me, or am I reacting to something in my environment? So, I'm now going to talk through one of my projects that I took on, and this was in my role as head HR for Centrica Energy. So Centrica Energy is an upstream oil and gas business. It's the upstream arm to Centrica, so Centrica owns British Gas. So it's the part of the business that we drill oil and gas for. And the population we have working in Centrica Energy is a very scientific one, very engineering by background, therefore very logical. And in my role as head of HR, I was supporting the strategy directorate, and they were responsible for producing the long-term fundamental curves, price curves. So these pieces of analysis that they do ultimately will be a very important part to whether we make an investment decision or not, because it will tell us what we think the energy prices are going to do over the next 5 to 10 years. And so in our industry, a lot of very large investment decisions are based on whether we think it will be profitable in the years to come. So the strategy directorate and the fundamentals team in particular have a very high pressurised, high visibility role within the organisation. And my role with this function was as a business partner, so business partnering the HR director, the strategy director, and so to him I was acting in the role of advisor. And we had a situation where an individual approached me to talk to me about the difficulty he was having with his line manager and the behaviours that he was seeing from his line manager, to the point where he actually felt that he was being disadvantaged and bullied by this manager. Now, before the ODP, how I would have approached this situation would have been through your traditional employee relations route. So I would have had I did have a confidential conversation with him, encouraged him to talk to his director, encouraged him to talk to the line manager direct and try and have a mediated, informal one-to-one discussion with them. But because of the ODP, I recognised that there were another number of data points to kind of pull in here, and some of that was my interactions that I'd had with that leader and the reactions he invoked in me through his behaviour. And what that did was make me curious to understand, well, what else was going on for him, his name's Naz, what else was going on for Naz that made him react in the way he did to some very, what in my view seemed to be kind of straightforward requests and practices. We also had a team barometer score survey, which the strategy director did on a quarterly basis, and this was looking at different work practices across his directorate, and the scores on those barometers had been taking a nosedive for the last 3 months and 3 quarters. So actually we had some data there suggesting that even though they were having conversations about what was going on, nothing was actually changing. And so what that did was enable us to review the options. So in discussion with Niels, who's the strategy director, I talked through the traditional route, the grievance route, and the pros and cons of going down that perspective. but what it also did was enable me, because Niels was coming at his directorate from a place of positivity and willingness to want to create a high-performing team because of the role that they played in the organisation. What this did was gave us the opportunity to consider other options around, well, how do we really get underneath what the barometer data is telling us? How do we really get underneath what's going on between Naz and this individual? How do we really get into the process data area? So, you know, we had the content and the procedures, but what was the process data telling us? And so what I did was design an intervention around creation of focus groups. And what I wanted to do through doing this was provide the container for the safe conversation. So through my one-to-one with the individual, he also shared examples where behaviour from the leader, from Naz, had also been inappropriate with other people. And so it was important to create a safe container where everybody understood the boundaries so they could be open and honest and actually be able to share their views and their perspectives and enable us to then act as necessary. So I only designed that element of the process at that point in time because I did not know what that would bring up. I didn't know the kind of information we would get from that, and so I took a very emergent change perspective and actually recognising that that would then create the next step. So we briefed the leader, we briefed Naz about what we were doing around getting underneath the barometer scores. We briefed the teams around Niels' intention for us to change how we were working as a function, and actually recognising that it was important for him to provide his permission for these conversations to happen, to again create that safe environment for them to talk about what was happening for them. So we had the focus groups, focusing on the fundamentals team, split them into smaller groups, and started off the setup basically by gaining their commitments to how we were going to behave in those settings, because it was really important that they felt safe and that they felt that they had the trust in me to be able to replay their perspectives without them fearing retribution or comeback from Naz. And so we started off that focus group by just asking the question, what was it like to work in the fundamentals team? And the reason I went with that question was to enable a stream of consciousness to come off the top of the mind. So actually they needed to just get out what they needed to get out. And I also decided that because of some of the severity of the examples we had heard, actually to come at it from an AI perspective wouldn't really be, wouldn't land right with them, because actually it was important that they felt they had the airtime to get a lot of this off of their chest. So if I'd come in with so talk to me about what's working really well and let's celebrate all the great stuff that we're doing, would actually feel quite contrived given the context in which we were operating in. And so 3 focus groups provided us with a lot of verbatim feedback, a lot of views from each of the team around what their perspective of the world was. And actually all of the data came back to Naz as a leader, and the way in which he interacted with the team, the way he neglected to pass on feedback, the way he didn't recognise all the effort and the work that they were going to, and actually recognising that a lot of the issues that the team were experiencing could be addressed by Naz taking a different approach. So I assimilated all that information and I shared that back with Niels. And at that moment, I think Niels felt quite vulnerable. It was a bit of an oh shit moment. It could go either way. So, you know, we needed to really think about the options that we had. And the options we went through was around, actually, should we invoke a formal investigation, employee relations investigation, because of some of the examples that were cited, or do we enter into having a conversation with Naz and trying to share with him the views of the team. And so what was really central to this project was remembering from my hilltop. So everybody's view of the world is different depending on where they've come from, their upbringing, their values, and actually it was about creating the space to share those different hilltops, and so actually they could get to a common ground to be able to then build the future of their team. And so at that point, the next step was to have that conversation with Naz, which we did, and that involved feeding back the key themes to him. And naturally Naz was in a place of inquiry but also anger, because he felt that we had agreements in place already, and he couldn't understand why the team just didn't understand that. So it became clear that the next step was we needed to bring these two together. So we were in a strange scenario of the team had shared with me their view of the world. I'd shared that with Naz. Naz had shared his view of the world with me, but neither Naz nor the team had shared their views of the world with each other. So that then became clear that that was the next step. So contracted again through with Niels around how we would approach that, very much building on the similar principles from the focus groups around we need to create a safe environment, create the container for the discussion. So I played the facilitator role, did the setup, set expectations. Niels gave, I suppose, his commitment to this is the positive intent of building a successful future for the business. And actually we're asking people to be brave and step up and share their view of the world, because if we're not honest with each other, if we can't create that honesty and create the trust, then we might as well stop now. So we did that, and that meeting started off quite painfully, because people still felt unable to be open. But there were a couple of brave individuals amongst the team who did share their truth and actually did share their perspective of the world through a feedback tool that we had provided, and that enabled us to have the conversation. And actually they got to a really good place at the end of that morning session where they felt able to be able to come up with some commitments around how they were going to behave together, how they were going to act, about how they were going to provide feedback to each other, and hold each other to account when they saw behaviours that didn't match the commitments that they'd come up with. And so it was at that point that I agreed my exit strategy with Niels, and I found that really difficult because I wanted to follow up, I wanted to make sure they would stick into their commitments, I wanted to ensure that the team was okay and that the relationship had got a lot better. And it wasn't until on reflection that I realised that that was more my need around wanting to feel successful and wanting to have delivered a really great piece of work, as opposed to the need of the team. So the team didn't need me to do that because they need to own their own destiny and they need to rebuild their team alliances and structures. So the contract I had with Niels was at the next team day we would do a follow-up session, so he could check in on progress and actually reinforce the view to the function that this was really important for him and that they continue to work hard on building their relationships. That was my first real experience of thinking and approaching a piece of work in my day-to-day job differently because of my experiences on the ODP. in October 2012, I took on a new role. I became the head of innovation and change for Centrica Energy, and with that brought a very large blank piece of paper around actually what do I do. And so what I saw the opportunity for was to use this role as a way to practice my OD skills. And there were a number of things that I had to deliver around using an innovation process to help us think differently and come up with new ways and perspectives of thinking. And to me, that's a change process. And there were also pieces of work that I needed to deliver around our cultural journey. So we've created something called the Centrica Energy Way, which has three arms to it, so three movements: high performing, pioneering spirit and safety. And there's a lot of day-to-day stuff that goes with that, but what also came with it was the opportunity to move from being focused on a business unit through to the Centrica Energy system. So moving from working within a system in a system to now being looking at a role across the whole of the Centrica Energy system. And what I recognised was, in this world of engineering, in this world of scientists and analysts, my role here was to really bring what was missing and to help the organisation recognise what was missing. So one of the first things I brought to this role is raising the awareness about emotion and feeling. And actually, if people are feeling positive and happy in the role that they do, then their level of performance and productivity therefore should increase. Bringing this type of language into the organisation has been interesting. I think the business thinks I'm slightly mad, but actually that's what's needed right now. And what I'm also looking to do is join the dots. So what do I mean by that? I've talked about them being very linear and very logical in their thinking. So if we take the Liquid model, for example, I'm having several conversations about why you may want to join up culture, leadership and strategy in order to create some transformational change within the business. But no, my business leaders don't understand why you would want to talk about strategy and culture in the same breath, because they don't understand, or they don't see the relevance between the culture in which you create should help you achieve your strategy. So that's my current challenge at the moment. And this really hit home to me when I went up to Aberdeen. I spent 2 days up in Aberdeen. So Aberdeen is the head office of our upstream business, and I was entering into a new system. And what I really noticed was the sense and feeling I picked up from just spending a day and a half in that office, to the point where I was on a phone conference call on Thursday morning to the HR leadership team, and my boss, Carol, said, "Faye, are you okay? You sound really flat." And I had to make up a bit of an excuse around, oh, it's because I'm in the lobby and I don't want people to hear what I'm saying. But actually, on reflection, what I recognised was I was feeling how everybody feels working in that office. And actually, the pressure and the time and the pure amount that they actually have to get on and deliver is becoming very oppressive. And actually, I just recognised that I was just feeling how everybody else was feeling in that organisation, even though I had literally been there for a day and a half. And I felt like, what's the point? What's the point in me trying to deliver what I need to deliver in this organisation when actually everybody's just really struggling with the day-to-day grind? And I suppose what I recognised was I was feeling the system and the environment, and it wasn't a reflection on the work I'm trying to do. but actually it was the context in which I'm trying to deliver what I need to deliver. So it was really valuable insight. And what this role is also enabling me to do is feed that back to the leadership team. So our leadership team don't really get to see what it's like operating in the organisation. And so I'm able to, through my journeys across the organisation and the work I'm doing, feed back in that insight around actually how does it feel and how are people feeling in the business, as opposed to, you know, what's the score on the engagement survey telling us. Project 2 that I'm going to talk to you about is very much within this role, and it started off with how do we re-energise the CE way, and it was about creating a number of roadshows, creating what we call the CE way relay, because the engagement data we had suggested that people could see a difference but weren't quite sure what it meant to me. So historically we'd very much operated at the organisation and team level, and this was about taking it back to the individual. We were taking an AI approach, so starting to ask people to co-create the sessions by celebrating success and stories, capturing what's going on well for people amongst the CE way in their businesses and how that's helping them to deliver the performance they need to deliver. It's also an opportunity to address some of the engagement output we had around we don't really recognise where we're going, we don't see the leadership team, we're not aligned to the direction. So actually it enabled us to build into the design the opportunity to discuss that, to see where we're going, have the business updates, and also for the leadership team to get out and about on the road. Now the environment whilst we've been designing those roadshows has changed. So our group strategy has changed, and that's impacted on our centric energy system. And so what we've had to do, or what I've had to do, was propose that we redesign the format of the sessions. So they're no longer as celebratory or as co-created by the individuals, but actually now it's really and truly becoming the container for the discussion around, well, what does that future strategy mean to me? And actually allow people to have the space and the time to have their voices heard, and for the leadership team to still be out there visible, but also hearing what people have got to say and helping individuals feel connected to where the business is going, and recognising that if you're in part of the business that's not doing as well and there's uncertainty over the future, then actually they need as much time and space to discuss that as the people who maybe we've got a much more exciting growth agenda have. And so what this project has provided is the ability for me to now demonstrate the importance of joining those dots. So really focusing on the transformational part of the Berkeley model by getting the leadership team to join the dots between culture and strategy. So we should automatically now be talking about how are we going to achieve 100 barrels of oil equivalent per day by talking about what do we need to step up, how are we going to find new ways of operating, what do we need to do differently. So really using this as the opportunity to demonstrate why these two parts are really integral to each other and interlinked. I believe we're continually reviewing it, and therefore, operating in an emergent change environment, because what I'm noticing is the impact of the larger system on our system. So Centrica Energy being part of the Centrica group, because the group strategy's changed, that's impacted ours. And actually I've been, over the last 2 weeks or so, very much been feeling like a torn middle. So the decisions that Centrica board are making are impacting us people are looking to me to decide how we're going to deliver the road shows, but I can't give them the direction. And actually it's just brought to life the complexity of operating in an organisation, and the amount of energy and bravery it takes to operate in this space. And so I think that's all the learning. There's probably lots more that I've got, but that's probably where I'm at to now. This project, the Seaway to 2018, is still happening. It's live. I was with the leadership team on Wednesday, and that created a very big debate around whether we were business as usual or not, and actually whether they wanted to go out on the road or not. And thankfully my MD said, why would you not want to talk to your people? And that's kind of where we were left. So I'm still positive. I'm still feeling that, you know, this is the right intervention for the organisation, and I'm looking forward to putting it off by the summer.